How would John Hassett describe himself?
A charismatic entrepreneur.
He's a businessman with multiple titles, the Director of Operations for the Mohave County Medical Examiner's Office and the CEO of Serenity Memorial Group, a company that owns 5 funeral home locations in the same county. His mortuaries, Arizona Affordable, Desert Lawn, and Mohave Memorial, are on a rotation schedule provided by the public fiduciary.
Funeral home owners in Mohave County say that officials made a mistake deciding who should run the medical examiner's office. It's been an ongoing issue for a while, but this time the county contracted with a company that owns several funeral homes in the area. Specifically, the president of that company is now in charge of the medical examiner's office.
Fifth largest county in the nation by area has struggled to find a medical examiner.
And it's been that way for a long time in Mohave County. 9 months ago, officials did something that they call unorthodox, awarding a multi-million-dollar contract to a company that owns several funeral homes in that same county.
Am I manipulating the rotation in order to benefit my own organizations? Absolutely not.
John Hassett is the Director of Ops for the Mohave County Medical Examiner. He did own Serenity Memorial, which possesses a group of funeral homes in the county. Last November, Mohave awarded Serenity a multi-million-dollar deal as an independent contractor to run the ME's office. Lietz-Fraze says the number of bodies the ME's office reports they have received this year is far more than what they've actually accepted.
But is there a conflict of interest here?
Fox 10 Investigates did meet with someone who says she worked on Hassett's staff in the medical examiner's office. She does not want to be identified, but the former Serenity employee says there's truth to allegations made by funeral homeowners we spoke with.
It was very apparent very early on that law enforcement was constantly calling Desert Lawn, even though Bradbury or a different funeral home was on rotation. They just automatically called Desert Lawn.
As for why she quit her job,
there was a lot of walking a fine line of what's ethical and moral and what's not, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore.
competing mortuaries in Mohave County say they are financially impacted by this move. How? They claim they're getting less death calls from the medical examiner's office, alleging the person now in charge is taking advantage of his position. And Naomi Bradbury Marchand owns Bradbury Memorial Center in Lake Havasu City. At least 90% of her business comes from cremations.
Sometimes it gets to be 188 degrees back there.
Those require authorization from the medical examiner. In this business, the mortuary and the examiner's office cooperate to make sure decedents are collected in a timely fashion, so that funeral arrangements run as scheduled.
We did not see that there was conflict.
During a county board meeting last November, the procurement director and county manager told supervisors there would be no conflict of interest if Serenity Memorial Group operated the medical examiner's office. President of Serenity Memorial Group is John Hassett. He owns several funeral homes, Arizona Affordable, Desert Lawn, and Mohave Memorial, located in cities across Mohave County. Hassett also sits on the Planning and Zoning Commission.
The mortuary is not going to be running the medical examiner's office, and I think that that's a big concern, not only from other funeral home owners, but the community in general.
Hassett proposed to be director of operations for the medical examiner's office and hired Dr. Mosley to join his staff as the licensed pathologist focused on autopsies.
Supervisor English.
I was just going to say motion to approve if there's...
Oh, I have some questions.
Buster Johnson was skeptical. The District 3 supervisor was the only board member to vote no on awarding the contract to Serenity Memorial.
I figured there would be a conflict of interest because in the same business as the other mortuaries are, so there's always going to be conflict there.
The board voted 4-1 to award a 3-year contract paying Serenity a little over $1 million annually, costing taxpayers $92,000 per month. Costing taxpayers $92,000 per month. Costing taxpayers $92,000 per month.
There's no ability for us to hold somebody accountable. He's not a licensed medical examiner. So if I say, you know, you're not doing your job, it's like, well, you knew I wasn't a licensed medical examiner when you gave me the job.
We could all see that it was a conflict of interest. We were all fully aware of what was going to happen. when Mr. Hassett got the contract. We just knew it. And we tried to tell them. And at one point in a meeting, the county manager said he didn't care.
If people focused on their own business and their own issues, think of how much better we could serve the community.
We have significantly declined in the amount of families that have come to us from the medical examiner's office.
Talking about the county's rotation schedule, it lists on-call funeral homes to accept decedents who either don't have families to represent them, financial resources for a burial, or a family does not know which mortuary to choose. Each mortuary is scheduled by its region and month. The ME's office publishes data online to show how many death calls funeral homes on rotation have received. But Bradbury Marchand says her records and the county's just don't match.
We have information where it's saying that they released 22 individuals to us that month. We maybe got 4. There were other months that they were saying that we got 12, we got 1.
According to the county's case log, there have been a little more than 1,300 calls to funeral homes from January through July of 2022. The data shows Bradbury received 91 during that span. As for funeral homes owned by Serenity Memorial Group, there were nearly 450 calls, 33% of the total through 7 months.
Am I manipulating the rotation in order to benefit my own organizations? Absolutely not. So thinking that calls were being forwarded to another funeral home, this has been something that's been in the industry for many years.
It was very apparent very early on that law enforcement was constantly calling Desert Lawn, even though Bradbury or a different funeral home was on rotation. They just automatically called Desert Lawn.
I would say that I'm very sorry that those individuals feel that way. They've all got my number.
The mortuary with the second most calls in 2022 is Lietz-Fraze Funeral Home, but the owner shared her data with us. She claims Lietz-Fraze received 24 death calls in 3 months of rotation in February, April, and May, not 69 cases as a medical examiner's office shows, a difference of 45 decedents. So where did those people end up?
Data and the numbers that are provided by law enforcement, investigators, emergency departments within hospitals, hospices, the data is there. It's available at any time. Autopsy reports are public record.
The purpose of the list is to create an even playing field for eligible funeral homes to care for decedents who don't have families or financial resources for a burial, or their families just don't have a preference. And County Supervisor Buster Johnson says he received complaints himself.
We were having problems with bodies being picked up and not taken to the medical examiner for a day or 2 or 3, which is just not acceptable to me and not acceptable in any practice I've ever heard of.
He was the lone no vote against the county's deal with Serenity Memorial.
If someone has an unattended death with law enforcement, if they have a hospice death and the family says, you know, I don't have any pre-need arrangements, I don't have any, I don't know who to call, I'm not from the area or something along those lines, it would go to the rotation funeral home.
Death calls come in, but funeral homeowners like Bradbury Memorial say since Hassett took over operations at the OME,
the calls dropped significantly.
The medical examiner's office releases online data showing the amount of month-to-month calls, but multiple funeral home owners, including Bradbury Marchand, say their internal records don't match the number of calls listed. Today, another funeral home went public saying Serenity has negatively impacted their business.
I really thought that after Fox News episode aired that the county would look into this problem. Again, it's a very, very simple problem. You can walk down this hallway to your county office, pull the numbers for each funeral home in this county for the last year, for the last 10 years, and you will see the problem that we are having.
The owner of Lietz-Fraze Funeral Home voicing frustrations to the Mohave County Board of Supervisors this morning. Denise Burley was the county's director of public health. Part of her job was to make sure Serenity Memorial Group followed the scope of services detailed in the county's contract. An important nugget within Mohave County's request for proposal for medical examiner services says no preferential treatment. Logan Elia, an attorney with Rose Law Group, explains.
And that provision is specifically designed to prevent any conflict of interest or any acting on a conflict of interest, and make sure that everybody plays fair with each other, especially when we're talking about the distribution of public funds.
Based on the agreement, no preferential treatment can be used in choosing a funeral home for a decedent.
If there's evidence that he's not following the terms, then in my mind, there's nothing that would prevent the county from auditing compliance.
I've told my family, if I die, I don't care where you drag my body, just make sure it's not in Mohave County.
This woman does not want to be identified. She says she's a former employee of Serenity Memorial Group. Through documentation, we verified that she worked for the company.
There was no real training. It was just you go in, you figure it out, and that's that.
The ex-employee tells us she assisted with autopsies and transportation of decedents, and she claims she witnessed chain of custody issues.
Sometimes there was calls and they would leave bodies at one of John's funeral homes. He'd call them substations.
We're having problems with bodies being picked up and not taken to the medical examiner for a day or two or three, which is just not acceptable to me and not acceptable in any practice I've ever heard of.
He would do that from anything from an overdose or suicide to homicide cases. They would sit in different coolers, not at the medical examiner's office, sometimes for a week.
According to a research report on death investigations published by the National Institute of Justice, a properly maintained chain of custody and prompt transfer will reduce the likelihood of a challenge to the integrity of the evidence. Your mortuaries are used as substations with the same type of equipment as what you'd have at the medical examiner's office?
Same type of equipment and same type of equipment, but the mortuaries are not, they're in no way associated with what we're doing.
Sometimes there was calls and they would leave bodies at one of John's funeral homes. He'd call them substations.
So you're saying these substations are not at Desert Lawn mortuaries at all?
That they are not. No.
Your mortuaries are used as substations with the same type of equipment as what you would have at the medical examiner's office?
Same type of equipment.
So you're saying these substations are not at Desert Lawn mortuaries at all?
That they are not. No.
It says the substation strategy is about safety due to long drives between cities in Mohave County.
If an investigator feels that they are tired or can't make the drive down to Havasu and back to their return area, they have the ability to drop a non-high profile case off at a substation for transport the following day.
So you're saying these substations are not at Desert Lawn mortuaries at all?
That they are not. No.
They are at facilities that are just made for substations?
Facilities that the contractor owns, but they are not part of his funeral home businesses, correct?
At the medical examiner's office, it's very closely monitored, the temperature of the coolers, because at certain degrees, bodies start to decomp, bodies start to decomp, bodies start to decomp. If you have to run labs at certain temperatures, you can't get the same accurate results that you're going to need to determine whether it was an accidental overdose or somebody killed them.
And yes, I expect that there would be expediency in moving those bodies from the substation to the medical examiner office, just because that's where they should be.
If people focused on their own business and their own issues, think of how much better we could serve the community.
The man in charge of the medical examiner's office recently sold his company, Serenity Memorial Group, but John Hassett will retain some role within the company as he's still on contract to run the ME's office, but as he's still on contract to run through the county's public fiduciary office. On-call funeral homes are scheduled by month and region to take decedents who either don't have families claiming them, families without financial resources for a burial, or loved ones undecided on a mortuary choice.
We have requested the data of names of these cases we supposedly received, but the health director says it's human error and he's working on it. The joke is sadly that if you want to kill someone, do it in Mohave County.
One resident says when her relative passed away, law enforcement informed her that Mohave Memorial was the mortuary picking up the body. That mortuary is owned by Serenity, not affiliated with Lietz-Fraze, the funeral home requested by family.
My concern here is that other families have been told that Lietz-Fraze is affiliated with Mohave Memorial, which is incorrect, which takes their right of making a choice.
Lietz says she has no choice but to seek legal advice if improvements aren't made.
Do the right thing and rectify this problem.
If people focused on their own business and their own issues, think of how much better we could serve the community.